The last few months have been quite stressful. The training was very exhausting for my body. I arrived in this black and gold landscape. To be honest, I was surprised that the grass was not that color, because everything around seemed to be covered with this cover. Fort Benning became something of a home for me for several months, while I was sent through different training programs. Ranger School had a significant impact on my physical condition, as well as on everyone who decided to go this route. About the affairs of the house, well, I didn't have a house as such. Technically, I was single, although Anne and I were back together, but with so much training going on, it didn't make sense to do anything more serious. She put a stake through my heart in the past. Yes, I made a mistake too, but instead of talking to me, she decided that she needed revenge. It took a lot of time and company for me to forgive her. But I think she understood why I kept my distance and tried to show that she was not going to do anything that would cause even more suspicion. She lived on my parents' property and spent a lot of her free time with my mother, learning how to run a home. I was surrounded by men, and the little time I had to myself was spent sleeping, eating, or taking care of my equipment. Shining my boots has been a great way for me to slow my thoughts down and take a moment to reflect on the long road ahead. I've never been known as a planner. I usually acted impulsively, and my long-term plans rarely went beyond a few months. But when I slowed down my mind, everything looked different. That night would be my last time as a student, 30 days of vacation and recovery ahead, and then Hunter Army Airfield in Savannah, Georgia. I was looking forward to getting a good night's sleep in a real bed next to a warm body that wasn't covered in fur and didn't snore like a chainsaw. As a combat medic, I knew I could be assigned to any of the companies in the area, and as one of the few tab medics in the Army, I also knew I would make a good addition to the Ranger battalions. While I was gathering my few belongings, mostly my uniform and a few sets of civilian clothes, one of the instructors slowly walked over to where I was putting my things. "I heard you're going to Savannah," said the instructor. His name was Kitchen. Like all the other instructors, Kitchen was always extremely professional. Cruel, merciless, but professional. Not a bad place, good people there. "That's right," I answered without stopping. "I'm looking forward to it. When you arrive, find one guy, workman, a medic just like us. He will take care of you." Without saying another word, he turned and left. That's why Kitchen liked me. We were both doctors. He put on his sand beret and headed to the next group of cadets. The black streak of bad luck that followed me like a shadow did not leave me even over the next months. During the last part of Ranger School, a hurricane came through, which actually forced the training to stop, but not enough to force an evacuation. It was a terrible time, but a rewarding experience. When the rain subsided, the heat became almost hellish. She was choking. The soft ground after heavy rain and the rapid evaporation of water created ideal conditions for the inevitable. When we were working on one of the raids against a mock enemy, I was the temporary platoon sergeant and wanted the assault team to go from the south side of the target. I placed the support team on the west side of the objective. They had a slight advantage due to their higher position, and when the assault team attacked, they would be able to change fire to avoid accidental friendly fire, but still continue to fire on the target, preventing the enemy from escaping. This was my first assessment role in the final phase, and my experience so far had made it easy to get passing grades the first time, which is quite rare in such a critical environment. My rather unorthodox tactics attracted the attention of the Ranger instructors, but their task was more of a mentorship than to create mindless robots. They often allowed Ranger cadets to develop their own tactics as long as it was safe to do so, and from one camp to another, rumors would spread about a student who came up with crazy, but always working tactics, and this helped both my comrades and instructors listen to my wild ideas. This tactic was not much different from others I had used at Camp Merrill. There, the target was a small methamphetamine lab facility that was distributing, and the potential for intelligence gathering was great. The facility itself was perfect. After I got a closer look at the site, I quickly turned the raid into an ambush, positioning the assault team along one side of the wide dirt road that led directly to the objective, and using the support team as part assault and part suppressive force. In coordination with the instructors, I requested air support and, rather than aiming it directly at the objective, which would have destroyed any potential intelligence, I marked the target 100 meters north of the objective. I organized this as a signal for one of the groups to open fire, and with my small group, we would attack from the east. This would be a quick hit and run tactic. We would run down the road, and hopefully this would force the enemy to follow us. As soon as we passed the last man in the ambush line, they would call for a mock kill to avoid getting too close to the enemy and their weapons with blanks. After the ambush, the assault element from the support group would call a ceasefire and advance towards the buildings, taking the remaining enemy prisoners, which would help with reconnaissance. Once cleared, they could calmly inspect each building and collect any necessary intelligence, all of which would take from 3 to 7 minutes. Everything was within standard time frames. The plan worked without a hitch. A large amount of intelligence was collected, and I received a second passing grade on my first try in the mountains. There was no need to go through a third patrol anymore, and my desire to help my comrades made it almost impossible for me to get kicked out of this school. But this time, the perfect storm hit us. With the furious evaporation of water and the weight of the students and their equipment, the stress on the ground reached a critical point and it collapsed. When everything calmed down, 5 ranger cadets and 1 ranger instructor were buried under a large layer of dirt and earth. Quickly forgetting about my position, I abandoned all my equipment and immediately headed towards the place where my platoon was stationed. Taking command, the rest of the platoon followed me and the instructors, who were already running. When we reached the site, I turned and pointed at a group of students, ordering them to go back to get their backpacks to get their collapsible shovels, while the enemy had already gotten theirs. Chaos was overcome by necessity. We have all ceased to be instructors and cadets. Under these circumstances, we worked together to save our brothers before they ran out of air. When the others returned with shovels and began to work furiously, a few minutes later they found all 6 unconscious but alive. The instructors immediately called the medics on duty, and I quickly began giving orders, naming the necessary equipment: oxygen, a stretcher, and several bandages to create splints. Apart from a few bruises and contusions, they were fine and did not require hospitalization. Once I was sure everything was okay, I walked away from the group and took a moment of silence and privacy to let myself let out a few tears. A few minutes later, I heard soft footsteps approaching me. We were given a temporary suspension of training for safety reasons, and the rest of us enjoyed a short break to eat and replenish the calories we had expended. I realized from the sound of footsteps that it was not one of my comrades before a voice broke the silence. "You reacted faster than the other instructors," said Moyers, the instructor who was supposed to be assessing the assault commander and was buried in the collapse along with other students. Having regained consciousness, the first thing he did was ask about the condition of his charges. This was the first priority of the instructors, taking care of the rangers assigned to them. "We would have died if it weren't for you, and then you made sure that the doctors had all the necessary equipment before they arrived. You wouldn't be in this situation if I hadn't put you there. It was my plan, my tactics, my responsibility. Can I help others before I am sent home?" "What are you even talking about?" he asked, his voice rising. "Who told you that you would be sent somewhere other than back to training?" "Well," I answered, not understanding the situation, "I almost killed my platoon. I almost killed the senior instructor." "Did you make it rain?" I shook my head, and he continued, "Did you make the earth move from the weight of the water?" I shook my head again. "Then how did you almost kill someone?" "I repeat," I said, "this was my plan. My responsibility. I have to take the blame for this." "I thought doctors were smart." He laughed. "Doc, you're damn stupid. You saved our lives, idiot. Without your reaction, your orders and instincts, we would probably still be underground." He extended his hand to me, and I shook it. "Doc, you saved my life. I won't forget this." And he didn't forget. Once we completed the course requirements, I was introduced to Medical Platoon Sergeant Kitchen, who immediately took me under his wing. He reasoned that since there were only a few of us, he should make sure that I lived up to the legend of the Medic Ranger. I was physically and mentally exhausted, more than ready to just relax, forget about my thoughts, and move on. The flight home was uneventful. I changed from my uniform to civilian clothes, mainly to avoid engaging in conversations with people who would feel obligated to talk to me just because of my uniform. Anne was waiting for me at the airport and took my luggage, her hug making it clear that she really missed me. I didn't have time to say a word when she covered me with kisses, and her hands slid all over my body. We barely made it to the car when she forced me to get behind the wheel, and she reached into my pants. It was incredibly difficult to drive when your insides felt like they were being sucked out through a tube. I've never complained about Anne's petting skills, but there was something special about this particular case. She acted like a hungry woman desperately trying to get enough after a long fast. My head seemed to be floating in the clouds, and I almost lost consciousness from the force with which her skillful lips covered my flesh. "Where did you learn this?" I asked with slight suspicion, but mainly because of the overwhelming sensations that I had never experienced with her before. "I watched a lot of films," Anne answered with a slight laugh. "Did you like it?" "If I liked it even more, I probably would have become the first person who could impregnate someone," I answered when the traffic light turned green. "I'll need a minute to recover." "Your mother is waiting for you," she answered. "I thought this would be enough to tide you over until we had time alone. She's been waiting for this day for a long time, and she's very upset that you didn't tell her how long you'd be gone when you left." "I didn't really have a choice," I replied, still feeling bitter about my mother's interference in my life, even after all these months. Besides, she knew that I wouldn't tell her anything about my life, because she wasn't particularly supportive of me when I left for basic training. I didn't think her attitude would change if I told her I was leaving for ranger school. "Yes," she laughed quietly again. "She and I talked about this for a long time. She thinks that you have come back to marry me and that I will go with you." "To be honest, Anne," I said, expecting my mother to raise this question rather than her, "I didn't think much about it. I was sure that during this time you had already found someone for yourself. When I left, it seemed to me that we both agreed that there was nothing between us anymore." "I know, but I want you to know what I want," she said. "I know I made a mistake, and I promise it won't happen again. I was a child, immature and resentful, but I understood a lot and realized what you mean to me, and I don't want to lose it anymore. I need to deal with my mother first," I said. "After this, we will have plenty of time to talk." When we arrived at my parents' house, it became obvious that there was a big party going on. Usually my parents understand a surprise as, "Who brought what to drink and what kind of meat I will cook." Crap. "It's not as bad as it seems," she said again with a grin. "Believe it or not, all the food is already prepared." Yes, she knew very well about my long cooking duties. "And they've been drinking since I left to pick you up, so they'll all be busy playing dominoes or whatever else you men do when you're drinking." "Damn," I continued, noticing my brother standing at the front door. "I'm definitely not in the mood to deal with this nonsense." "He just wants to see you," she replied. "Then he will leave. He doesn't want to create problems." "Oh, do you know what happened?" "No," she answered. "Your mom didn't tell me anything, which, frankly, was very strange. She's a big gossip, and the fact that she told me that I should find out from you or him really surprised me." Before I could ask, she continued, "Yes, I tried to ask him, but he said it was a family matter, and if you thought I needed to know, you would have told me a long time ago." When we got out of the car, my brother came up to me. There was no emotion on his face, just like mine. We both knew that our mother was undoubtedly watching us from somewhere. We tried to maintain at least the appearance of friendliness. "Brother," he extended his hand to me, and I shook it. "Glad you're back. When you have a minute." "I don't have it." "Okay," he said, smiling at Anne. "It's good to see you again, Anne. Enjoy the party." He went to the car parked at the site and sat in the back seat. There was a man behind the wheel who looked at me with a cold gaze until they drove away. "It's so warm," Anne pretended to shiver, wrapping herself in an imaginary coat. "I could build a snow castle with so much love." It's a long story, I replied. Everyone keeps telling me this as if it's the real answer. Okay, she took my hand and led me into the house. Let's just try to enjoy the evening before we really enjoy each other. God, how I missed this. Anne whispered as my tongue slid along her neck, approaching her ear. I left behind me a trail of tender kisses, so light that one might think that they were not there at all. Her body shuddered slightly as my hands began to trace her breasts. As they slid down her sides, towards her hips, a light moan escaped her lips, and she pulled me into a long, passionate kiss. What part did you miss? I asked, continuing to go down to her chest. About everything. Her breathing became uneven as my hands moved lower. Anne was an incredible woman with whom I could feel a real closeness. We spent time together, enjoying every moment, and her emotional responsiveness always surprised me. She could easily immerse herself in our moments, completely surrendering to the sensations. Please, let's continue. I can't wait any longer, she said, snuggling closer to me. I answered her request, feeling the tension building between us as if we were connected on a deep level. Our unity was so intense that it seemed that we were literally becoming one, losing track of time. It was wonderful, I muttered, continuing to move with her as if in the same rhythm. At every moment I felt her response, her breathing quickened, and her body responded to my every gesture. I was a good girl, wasn't I? She whispered, her voice trembling with excitement. You're always good, I replied with a slight smile, enjoying the closeness we shared. And finally, having reached the climax, we both felt deep satisfaction, as if there was nothing else important in this world. When it was all over, Anne fell asleep in my arms, and I lay next to her, feeling peace and quiet, knowing that this moment was ours and would remain in our memory for a long time. I rolled over onto my back, looking at the ceiling, and wondered if I had made the right decision earlier that day. I was awakened at 3 a.m. by the feeling of a warm hand squeezing my dignity. My endurance was clearly reaching its limits, and its warmth made it almost impossible to stay afloat for more than a few minutes. She moved with such incredible grace that I no longer knew where the end was and where the beginning was. My attempts to somehow influence the situation were easily thwarted when she gently but confidently pulled my hands away. The atmosphere in the room was filled with the sounds of our heavy breathing and the slightly creaking bed, which at some point already seemed like a separate musical accompaniment. When she reached the moment of complete satisfaction, I was at my limit. Her happiness seemed to rub off on me, creating a feeling of completion. We both fell asleep, remaining in each other's arms, letting the silence of the night end the day. When we finally got out of bed to go have breakfast, I had already had sex with her 4 times and had regained my strength from a long period of sleep deprivation. We didn't even bother to greet anyone when we entered my parents' house, immediately starting to eat. My mother didn't take her eyes off me. All evening I avoided talking about the school I had just graduated from, much less where I was going next, but I felt that luck was eluding me. Are you going to tell me where you've been for the last few months? She didn't wait for me to finish my second plate of food before disturbing my peace. I didn't plan on it, I answered between bites. Where is your father? He left early in the morning to buy more food for today. We figured you'd want to eat your favorite foods before you leave for wherever you're going. He's lucky, I said. I should have woken him up. Be kind to your mother, Anne put in, trying to hold back her laughter. Mom, I continued, I've been to different places, so it's easier not to tell you where I was than to explain all this and why I was there. If I tell you everything I did, you'll grumble, and I'll spend the rest of the time listening to you complain about how dangerous it all is. I'd prefer to avoid this. So this is really dangerous. Her hand dramatically covered her mouth, and I couldn't help but laugh. Anne, I said, laughing too hard to give any meaningful response to my mother's claims, which would certainly be used against me in the future, you see that my mother has serious hearing problems. She only hears those parts of the conversation that she can use to play out such dramatic scenes, I pointed at her with a fork, or to make you feel guilty. If you're going to spend time with her, I suggest you get your hearing checked, because my brother's wives have the same problems, so it's clearly contagious. So you two are going to get married." My mother's jubilation was obvious, and her words were interrupted only by Anne's laughter. "I see now what you mean," she replied, laughing. "But you can't blame her for wanting her beloved son to marry her beloved adopted daughter." "But my brother is already married," I replied. "But if you are interested, I'm sure I can arrange a meeting for you." Anne jokingly hit me on the arm as I reached for the third helping. "I don't understand what's going on here," my mother sighed. "Anne, will you get married or not?" "Mom," I interrupted, "why is my brother's car parked here?" "Why is his car here?" I asked my mother, whose notorious interference was clearly continuing. "Because he's here," she answered dryly. "He just wants to talk to you. You have no idea how difficult it is for me to balance which of my children will come to visit me." "Are you serious?" I could hardly contain my irritation. "Mom, you know what he did to me. I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now if it weren't for him." "It was an accident," she answered, her voice shaking with panic and fear. She looked at Anne for support and continued, "Hasn't he told you yet? I thought that if both of them were here, he would at least tell me what happened." "How could you think so?" Anne grabbed my hand. "And why did you drag me into all this?" "Because if you're going to be part of this family," my mother said, crying, although I suspected they were just for show, "you need to know what happened." "I asked you not to interfere, Mom." I did not hide the icy tone in my voice, saturated with poison. "I left so you could stay with your beloved son." "It's you, little brother." His voice cut through the tense atmosphere, adding even more tension. "Why are you here, Angel? Didn't you understand yesterday that I didn't want to see you?" "I understand," he replied, smiling at Anne again. "How are you, dear?" "Don't," I said when he tried to touch her. "Don't you dare touch her. This is not my home, so I can't ask you to leave, but you people can't force me to stay here." I headed for the door, but Anne stopped me. "I think it's time for me to find out what's going on here," she said. "I know I don't deserve this, but I think I should understand what's going on here because it's clearly something important and your mother thinks you two need to clear things up." I looked at my mother, who hurried to stand next to my brother and, sighing heavily, slowly nodded. Having sat down at the table, I pointed my brother to the seat opposite me. Anne sat next to me, and my mother sat next to my brother. "Do you really want to know the truth? Even if what I tell you changes your perception of me, even if it changes the way you feel about me?" "Yes," Anne answered, taking my face in her hands. "Nothing will change how I feel about you. If this is what we have to face, I want to go through it with you." "Well," I said, looking at my brother. "Why don't you start, brother?" My voice was filled with venom again. "Anne," he began, ignoring my tone, "how much do you know about our family?" "Only what I saw and what your mother told you a little about." "Our family can be divided into two parts," he continued. "Half of our family lives a normal life 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. They have good lives, they get married, they become good citizens. And there is the other half not at all like that." "What does it mean?" Anne looked at me and asked a question. "That means they are criminals, my dear," my brother replied. "For many years, our family has been associated with influential criminals from the cartels. In each generation, one member of the family is chosen to lead it. They pool their accumulated wealth so that some of the children can live a normal life. Now I am the head of the family. Our uncle handed over the reins to me several years ago. But at first, it wasn't supposed to be me. It had to be me," I added, ending his speech. "I was the one who had to take over the family business." Anne looked at me with complete bewilderment. "But like my father before me, I refused this role." "Why?" asked Anne. "What made you make this decision? Is it because of me?" "No, dear," my brother laughed, answering for me. "He decided this long before he met you. But I'm sure that meeting you only confirmed that his decision was the right one." "Then what happened?" She released my hand, probably without realizing it, but I definitely noticed. "From the age of 8, I was trained and prepared to understand all the intricacies of the family business," I began. "What I perceived as fun games were actually exercises designed to teach me how to be a criminal." They wanted to raise an ideal leader, but I just wanted childhood. But even then, my wishes meant nothing. By the age of 12, I was already proficient in wielding a variety of weapons with great precision. What boy doesn't want to play with guns? But again, what I thought was a game turned out to be just part of the training. At the age of 15, I began to notice how people behaved around me. Always with some kind of fear, sometimes with respect, even with admiration, but fear was always a constant component. My cousin Edgar explained everything then. He was always next to me when we went out somewhere. I once asked him why he was always with me, and he simply replied that this was his place, as if it was something taken for granted. You see, Angel continued, Edgar was a bodyguard. He always stayed close. If anything happened, he had ways to contact us. You had the best life you could imagine, but you walked away from it like a spoiled child, all because of one little thing. A small thing. I stood up abruptly, and this made everyone in the room flinch. My brother put his hand in his jacket pocket, but then slowly removed it. Even you, even now, I added, are still afraid of me. Like almost the whole family. But we both know it wasn't a small thing, brother. We both know what really happened. It was an accident, he said dismissively. You made me kill all these people, I replied, and sudden silence engulfed the room. Anne covered her mouth with her hand in shock, again not realizing that her actions were like stabbing a dagger into my heart. It was an accident, he repeated again, calmer this time, as he sank back into his chair. Besides, it gave you a reputation. It ruined my life, I replied. Can you imagine what this did to your psyche? Can you imagine what this is like? You're exaggerating, he said, sitting down again. Even now, you act like a child who just couldn't handle the pressure. I was a child. I headed to the refrigerator and took one of the bottles of beer left over from last night's party. You were a man, he said. We took care of it. How did you do it? Anne intervened, looking from me to him. It doesn't matter, he continued, with the same coldness. The important thing is that he could become the greatest head of our family. He could do more than anyone before him. But instead, he developed a conscience and threw everything away because of one accident. It wasn't an accident, I replied. If it was an accident, brother, then why don't you tell Anne where our dear cousin Edgar is now? He's dead, my mother said, looking at Anne. He was stabbed to death in prison. Why was he in prison at all, Mom? I asked, slowly boiling with anger. It doesn't matter, Angel continued. His family is taken care of. Oh, so you're a good son to his parents, a good provider for a wife who doesn't exist, a good father for children who were never born. I slammed my palms down hard on the table as I continued. Tell her, brother, why did he have to die in prison? Like I said, he continued, it was an accident. What exactly happened? Anne asked, looking into my eyes. Please tell me, honey, what happened? One of the things we did for the community was small projects, I began. Sometimes it was helping an old lady plant a garden. Sometimes it was laying electricity from one business to a house where they couldn't afford it. This is dangerous. You need to turn off the power to the entire block in order to redo the wiring. This way you can work without the risk of being electrocuted. So it wasn't unusual for me to climb up an electrical pole and wait for my brother here to give the signal to start working. Edgar would go into the house and do the wiring inside while I did the wiring outside. When Edgar was ready, he signaled to my brother, and he signaled to me that the electricity could be turned on. We did this many times. I could do everything with my eyes closed. But this time everything was different, although it didn't seem strange at the time. There was no one in the house where Edgar entered, and the work was delayed because we were waiting for people to return. Angel simply said that it would be a surprise for them to enter the house and find that they had electricity. It seemed plausible at the time. Edgar stayed in the house longer than usual, but again, I realized this too late. When the people returned, the brother still did not give a signal. As cars began to fill the yard and more people entered the house, he still did not signal. When the cars stopped coming, he finally gave it to me. It was an accident. The mother spoke now. Who could have known? You know what, Mom? What children will be brought to the party? He knew, Mom, I said, pointing at Angel. He damn well knew and made me do it anyway. Do what? Asked Anne. When he gave me the signal, I connected the wires and began to climb down the pole, and then home. The police found out that there was a gas leak in the house, my brother continued. When they turned on the appliance, the accumulated gas in the house caused a spark in a damaged wire, which led to an explosion. No, I said. You told Edgar to cause a gas leak. You forced Edgar to expose the wires to create a spark. You made me a detonator. You sound like investigators, he said. It was an accident. If so, I added, then why was Edgar in prison? Why didn't you and I get there? Why was he the only one found guilty, while you and I got away with it? Because it was his fault, Angel continued. It was he who connected the wires incorrectly. He did not notice that he accidentally damaged the gas pipe and flooded the house with gas. It was an accident. But still I killed 24 men, women, and children. Faces that still haunt me, voices that speak to me when I'm awake. Tell me, brother, how do they sound to you? If they sound at all. I looked at Anne before continuing. We surrendered to the police, and they investigated. We were punished with community service for illegally tampering with the city's electrical system, but Edgar received 24 counts of second-degree murder. A month after the start of his sentence, he was stabbed to death in the shower. No witnesses. It was a tragedy, my brother continued, looking at Anne. The investigation was nonsense. Yes, it was, I added. We should have gone to jail too. Instead, we sit here and talk, and all these lives are lost. That's why I became a doctor, Anne. To do something good, to somehow atone for the crime I committed because I trusted the wrong person. I trusted my brother to want what was best for me, but instead he made me a fucking trigger. But this trigger has become known and feared, he continued. Demon and Angel, we became legends overnight because of this tragedy. People started to fear us, and it became easier to do business when our competitors thought we were willing to go to such lengths to secure our business connections. You made a circus out of tragedy, I added. What made you think that I would agree to this? What makes you think I'll go along with this? I continued, looking at my mother. Why should I even deal with a man who treats his own brother like that? But as always, it has to be your way, Mom, despite what anyone else may think or feel. Everything should be your way. Well, Mom, we sat down and talked. We told Anne why my brother and I could not and would never be in the same room. Are you satisfied now? We can put this behind us and just be a family, my brother said. No business, just us, brothers. Family. She looks like a good woman, he glanced at Anne, and our mother deserves some peace of mind. You know, Mom, I said, emptying the bottle of beer, you no longer have to worry about how to find time to be with each of us. When I'm gone, you'll never have to think about it again. Before anyone could say anything, I continued, I'm leaving, and believe me, I'm not coming back. Angel, I would appreciate it if you wouldn't come by for the next few weeks until I leave. After that, you can come whenever you want. If I suddenly need to come to the city, I will inform you in advance where I will be and for how long so that we do not accidentally meet. But remember, if I ever feel like someone in the family is watching me, I will get very angry. And if I get angry, few will be able to stop me from coming for you. Like you said, you've done a great job building my reputation. From now on, you and I are brothers in name only. The next time I expect to see you is at your parents' funeral. Your children can come to me if they ever need anything. This is not what I wanted. My mother was now crying openly. I just wanted you to talk and for us to be a normal family again. I told you not to interfere. My father's voice cleared the situation. He stood with bags of groceries in his hands. I went over to help him, but he continued. And I told you to leave Anne alone. I'm sorry, girl, that you had to carry this load. You shouldn't have gotten involved in this, but as always, my wife doesn't listen to anyone but herself. Turning to Angel, he said, Son, you will always be a welcome guest in this house, but now you better leave. Yes, Dad, Angel said, hugging our mother. I understand. Approaching me, he extended his hand. I'm glad you're here. You look good, brother. I just hoped we could put this behind us. Shaking his hand, I continued, I'll walk you to your car. Turning to my father, I made it clear that what I said next was intended for Angel's ears only. When we went outside, I saw the same car with a driver waiting for him. Listen, Angel, I will try to keep peace between us. But don't test me, don't try to get in touch, and don't think I want to get back into business. I don't want anything to do with this. Shaking his hand again, I added, I hope we never see each other again. Whatever it is, brother, he said, holding back tears. I'm sorry. She's an amazing woman. Take care of her. I know, I replied, and I'll take care. I half expected to see blood on the floor, my father said as he walked toward our secret spot. My mother didn't know I smoked and was sure my father had quit several years ago. In fact, only I knew that he was still smoking. It was our common secret, which we shared with pleasure. Sorry, son. I told her not to do it, but you know your mother. Yes, I replied, taking a drag from my cigarette. I didn't think she would go this far. How's Anne? What do you think? He answered. She's shocked. This is not a story that is easy to understand. But she loves you, son. She will come to her senses. It's not your fault. The court and families know that. It seems you have only yourself to blame. It's hard not to blame, I continued, but my thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the front door opening. It seems like this is for you. Do you want me to hold your cigarette? No, son, he said, throwing it away. It seems like this is for you. We both looked at Anne as she walked towards us. We need to talk, don't you think? She said, approaching us. And I definitely need one of your cigarettes, and I think you'll need this. She pulled out a 6-pack of beer from somewhere. Taking one can, I asked, what do you want to talk about? Was it really an accident, or do you really think your brother planned all of this? When we were in court, I began, all the evidence pointed to it being an accident. But if you knew my brother and how he thinks, you would understand. Everything always goes according to a pre-prepared plan for him. He is methodical and precise. I wouldn't be surprised if this was part of some kind of revenge on his part or a warning to someone. Then why do you blame yourself? Because I connected those wires, I replied. I caused an explosion. I pulled the trigger without even knowing I was holding a loaded weapon. But it's still my fault. You know, she added, now a lot of things about you become clear. Sorry you got caught up in this, but yeah, I guess that explains a lot. Now I understand why you said you cheated on me when that girl kissed you, and why you reacted the way you did when I slept with that guy. Yes, I replied. I didn't enjoy this conversation, but I knew it was necessary. What should we do now? She asked. How do you feel after what you found out? You've been carrying this burden for many years, a burden of guilt that you don't deserve. To be honest, it only makes you a person with a greater sense of duty. If you thought that this story would get rid of me, forgive me, dear, but you were mistaken. I'm even more crazy about you. She leaned over and kissed me tenderly on the lips. But your mother is heartbroken. I don't care, I replied. She must finally understand that not everything in life goes according to her plan. Some things can't be fixed. She interfered between us too, Anne said, kissing me again. That must also mean something. So, I replied, pulling her towards me, this means it's time for you to start wearing skirts. This will make it much more convenient to do what I'm about to do. I lowered my hand into her pants as our lips hungrily merged in a kiss. And for how long? She asked, breathing heavily. As long as you can tolerate me. The rest of the time passed surprisingly calmly. Anne and I had sex a lot. I don't think there was a single evening when I didn't fill her with me and we didn't fall asleep cuddling. But in the end, my vacation was coming to an end, and I needed to move on to a new service. I've known for a long time that I wanted Anne to come with me. Yes, call me what you want, but I really love this woman. When she packed her things, She knew it was a risk. We were moving across the country with no clear plan other than her gradually becoming my girlfriend. The day came, and the long journey to Georgia brought us even closer. I was looking forward to the stability of a new adventure. "So, will you live with me, or will you have to stay in the barracks?" she asked, a fair question. As I said, I'm not used to planning for the long term, and this point honestly didn't occur to me. "We'll figure it out," was my only answer. I'm honestly not sure if I'll be thrown straight into a combat zone or if I'll be given time to adapt. "Do you already know that you will go to the front line?" she asked with concern in her voice. "Well, we're going to the Ranger Battalion, honey," I replied. "They constantly go to hot spots. I think they will send me there as soon as possible, if not immediately." My words turned out to be prophetic. When we arrived in Savannah, I was informed that I had 2 weeks to get everything settled before I flew out to meet the rest of my platoon in beautiful Baghdad. During this time, Anne and I decided that the smartest thing to do was get married. This way she could be under my protection, enjoy my benefits, and resolve all issues in my absence, and we would also have something stable to return to. When our wedding celebrations ended, I was already on my way. Baghdad was a strange experience. As a new medic, I was immediately assigned to a rifle platoon, which was to clear a significant part of the southern districts of the city. We were soon deployed to Samarra to take part in a major offensive against militant forces that had seized large areas and posed a constant threat to foreign citizens and security forces. After that, it was back to Baghdad, where the worst part of my first deployment began. The first time we returned home, we were greeted at the airport with support. It was full of people waiting for their husbands to return from the war. The second time, there were fewer people. In the third, even less. Fourth time, even Anne didn't come to meet me. These trips became so frequent that they seemed like an ordinary event. Fewer and fewer marriages survived these returns. Many of my friends were divorced, separated, and their eyes no longer sparkled as before. "It doesn't get any easier, does it?" I asked Verk, the first person I met after fully integrating into the new platoon. We talked about Moyers and Kitchen, and I learned a lot about my instructors. Knowing about them made them less intimidating and more human. "No," he replied, "but it's becoming more familiar. It's probably the same thing. You can't hope for more in times like these. The world has gone crazy, D." Everyone started calling me just one letter and not by name, at least in my platoon and other military units. "What are you going to do until we get called again?" "I'll get drunk, I think," he replied. "My wife returned to her mother after our second trip. I might go to her, but it seems like we have nothing to talk about." "Yes," I said, picking up my backpack and heading towards the bus. "I don't have anything else to talk about either. It's hard to make them understand, you know." "They weren't there," he replied, following me. "Even with all your beautiful words, I'm sure you won't be able to describe all this to them in a way that they will understand. At least our job isn't as lousy as our commander's. He must send all these letters home. It must be corroding to my soul after all these years." "There are a lot of empty places here," I noted, looking around. Indeed, once this bus was crowded, full of laughter and screams, but now all that was left of all those faces were empty seats that reminded us who had not returned, and the piercing silence made the short trip to the base interminable. "Take care of yourself, brother," Varric said as we started to leave and headed to our cars. Not everyone stayed there. Our suicide rate was high. The system was not set up to handle so many people returning with invisible scars. "And you too," I replied. "I'm always in touch. Call me if anything happens." We parted ways, and I could not get rid of the anxiety that all of us in the military feel in those brief moments when we return home after a long absence. It's always the same. What if I come back to an empty house? What if my wife cheats on me and lives with a new lover? I forgave Anne a long time ago, but this fear always gnawed at me from the inside. The same was true of the stories of others who experienced this situation and did not cope with it. But as I pulled into the driveway, my heart pounding brought me back to reality. There she was, waiting for me, just like every time I was away. I knew we would argue. I knew we would argue about the constant deployments, but that would be tomorrow. Today, we would just enjoy our love. What do you want me to tell you? I want you to understand that I didn't marry you for a pension, a salary, or benefits, Anne said, trying to wrap her body even tighter around me. We were lying in bed after a wonderful session in which she once again tried to kill me with sex. But unlike the other times we talked about it, this time she didn't try to hide her tears. The way you're living, I don't think you'll turn 30. I can't just walk away. It's a contract, and I still have 2 years left on it. And then what? Enlist in the army again? Become an officer? What are you going to do then? What are we going to do? I reached out and pulled her close, trying to kiss away her tears as she tried to protest. Soon our lips met, and although she tried to punch me in the chest, our tongues fought with each other. I hate you. Then leave. She grabbed me even tighter. No one is forcing you here. She climbed on top of me, and we started having sex. You can be a real asshole sometimes, she said, continuing her maddening pace. I really, really hate you. Once she had caught her breath, she continued, I don't think I can do another one. If you leave, I don't think I can bear it. What do you mean? My heart began to break when she said those words. Do you want to leave? No, she said, holding my face. I don't want you to leave. Every time you come back, you always miss a piece of yourself. Don't be the one I fell in love with anymore. Get some sleep, I said, grabbing my clothes. I need a drink. When the next one comes in line, I will buy you a plane ticket to return home. While she sobbed quietly into her pillow, I headed into the backyard and lit a cigarette, wondering if we had made a terrible decision by getting married. I wonder if we will survive. Weeks passed, and, as we all suspected, the order came for another deployment, and, as we had discussed, Anne received a plane ticket to go home to my parents while I was gone. Our last night together was bittersweet. We talked, she cried while I packed up her uniform, and then I took her to the airport. Please come back to me, was all she said as she boarded. Have a nice trip, was all I replied. Fallujah. I can't remember how many patients passed through my area, but I used up all my supplies and refills several times. By the end of the long firefight, there wasn't a dry I left in the house. Some were crying for their fallen comrades. Others were crying because the adrenaline had simply run out. I wish I could tell you that I thought about my wife waiting at home, that some part of me realized that her fears were becoming reality, or that this final brush with death somehow solidified my decision to stay in the service or leave. But all this would be a lie. I was just thinking about the person I was working on, patch up the wound, apply a tourniquet to the blast injury, stabilize, and move on to the next one. Yes, it sounds very rude, but I simply had no time to get attached. In fact, what has made me so successful is my ability to look at my patients as faceless and nameless individuals. Except once. After several weeks in the theater, my unit was tasked with traveling to neighboring towns to re-establish and maintain contacts with the locals. This was an attempt to help gather soft information and, given my status as a healthcare professional, provide medical care that would otherwise not be available to these individuals. Due to cultural characteristics, it was extremely difficult for me, a man, to properly interview and process any village resident over a certain age. However, in that village, there was a little girl whom I especially liked. She was an adorable little girl who always followed us around asking for candy, which she shared with her younger brothers and sisters. Needless to say, we often gave her candy and other little things that we take for granted in this country, but it was life-changing for them. We came to this city 3 times without any conflicts. The townspeople always welcomed us with open arms, and the elders always invited us to tea. We believed that this was a good step to maintain these connections, until one day everything fell apart. On our 4th visit, the little face we were all used to seeing every time we entered the village was missing. The villagers behaved much differently than on previous occasions, and even the elder seemed a little wary of letting us into his home. While our translator was frantically trying to restore these lines of communication, several members of my party and I decided to pay a few visits to the homes of several villagers whom we had come to love. One of them was a little girl. As we approached her house, we discovered the reason why this little child did not greet us. Malik, my squad leader, began screaming as we immediately took up guard positions around the ruins of where their house used to stand. Malik, get your ass here, double time. What the hell is going on here? Our platoon sergeant asked before the sight completely silenced him. Who the hell did this? Malik, continued the squad leader, you translate what I'm going to tell you word for word. If you need to explain the feelings behind the words, then go ahead and do it. You tell them everything as loud as you can. This family was innocent. You give me one guilty person, or I will give you 100 innocent ones. You have 2 hours. Do you understand what I'm saying, Malik? When Malik looked at our platoon sergeant, he simply said, What the hell are you waiting for? Translate. Malik did so, and when he finished his speech, we began to go from house to house with practiced precision, fanatically searching and dragging out male figures from each house. We searched house after house, overturned furniture, cleared reasonable weapons caches. This was a tactic designed to cause fear and confusion in the city and hopefully give us acceptable results. My friends, Malik began, this is unacceptable. This is wrong. These people have done nothing. They are innocent. They are trying to survive out of fear. Well, Malik, I replied, sitting down near the elder's house, they still have half an hour before they are short of 100 innocents. If I were you, I would advise them to hurry up and hand over the culprits to us. At that moment, I heard a familiar sound and then continued, Do you hear that, Malik? American air support. You know what it means, you have to explain it to them. It was a very thin-veiled threat. I actually told him that we would bomb their village if we didn't get the results we expected. Again, he translated as it was his job. Panic and horror are universal. Doc, Malik came up to me a few minutes after our last conversation. You are calm. Please, I beg you, talk to me for a minute. While his words were clearly an attempt to get us to change our tactics, his behavior indicated something more, a renewed panic on his face, only evident in his eyes. What is it, Malik? I reached for my gun. Again, it was more of a show of force than a real threat to Malik, and I think he realized what I was trying to do. It was a dangerous culture, and he had to save face with his people, despite the help he had already given us. Every day he worked with us, his own family was at risk. My squad leader saw us and immediately, reading the situation, approached us with his weapon drawn, as if he had discovered that Malik could become a threat at any second. What's going on, Doc? Malik has a secret to tell us, I replied, reaching for my ever-present pack of cigarettes. So, tell us. There is a person who wants to speak out, Malik began. There are many of them, but they are afraid. There are jihadists in this city, and as soon as you leave, they will strike again. It was they who took advantage of what they call justice. Family because they accepted American medicine and American kindness. Which one? My squad leader kept his eyes on Malik as he said, Don't look, just tell me which one it is. When Malik identified the man, he continued, I'm sorry for what's about to happen, Malik. As he did so, he hit Malik in the upper back with the side of his weapon, but to the distant crowd, it would have looked like a strong blow to the back of the head. I stood up to help Malik to his feet before pushing him to walk towards the crowd. Translate, Malik. I said, looking at the platoon sergeant, hoping that he understood that the situation was completely under control. It's time I think we start interrogating every innocent person until we find the truly guilty one. I pushed Malik hard, causing him to fall. Speak up, you, now. He did just that. You, the squad leader grabbed a random person. You will come with me, Sergeant. When he looked at our platoon sergeant, they both began to move towards the elder's house, while I continued to push Malik. You can make sure that their fight to the death will be worthy, I said as I continued to push Malik and lead him towards the elder's house. Once there, I grabbed Malik and shook his hand. Sorry, my friend. This was supposed to happen. I understand, Malik replied, but this is the wrong person. I know, the squad leader replied, but that's what will instill fear in them. Tell this man to start praying, Malik. After finishing his statement, he loudly yanked the charging handle of his M4 so the man could hear. When Malik finished speaking and the man began, the platoon sergeant gagged him, and the squad leader shot him into the ground. We quickly secured the prisoner by placing a blind over his head and securing his hands behind his back, and then carried him to the elder's house. "What are you doing?" said Malik. "We just executed a prisoner, Malik," I replied, "or at least that's what they'll think." We moved towards the crowd, grabbed the second man, and repeated the process as with the first. The third man was the one Malik identified, and after we detained him, as we had done with the previous ones, Malik spoke to him. In a matter of minutes, we identified all the jihadists and their places of residence. After two more prisoners, one of whom was the first jihadist identified, we began clearing houses again. However, this time we were fully aware of which houses needed additional checks. "We're doing it like this in case there are other jihadists in the crowd, Malik," I said before he could ask his question. I could see that he was confused by our actions. If one of them reports, he will report that it was one of his fellow warriors who betrayed them all. "I understand, my friend," he said, "that you are playing a very dangerous game." "It's much better than the alternative," I replied. "If we arrest the innocent, more people will flock to their lines. This way they will have what we call plausible deniability, and if they are punished unfairly, they will turn to us for help and identify even more bad guys." 3 hours later, we discovered a small, wide factory, a large cache of weapons, and large sums of money. "Is there anyone else you know?" Our platoon sergeant confirmed to our informant that all known jihadists were in our custody before we released all the innocent people we captured. The townspeople's mood rose significantly when they realized that we had not taken any innocent lives, and the elder approached us with relief. We left the village knowing that we would not be able to return in the foreseeable future for our own safety. Each of us, according to our customs, paid tribute to the little girl who made us feel a little more human in this hellish place filled with death and despair. Each of us grieved in our own way. The people we took into custody provided us with a large amount of intelligence information, and based on this information, we were able to conduct several successful raids on previously unknown targets and training grounds. "Hey, D," Workman said, "Platoon Dad wants you to spend a few days at the clinic." "I don't like working at the clinic," I replied, continuing to repack one of my 3 relief bags. In each of them, I had all the equipment that I hope I will need in case of any outcome and unforeseen situation. "Yeah, about that," he said, stopping me. "It wasn't really a request. How much time did you spend at the FOB during this rotation?" "I don't know," I answered honestly. "Maybe a few hours." "Yeah, we've been here for 2 months," he replied with concern in his voice. "Even the line guys are starting to worry about the time you spend off the line." Did I slip? "No," he replied, "but you need time to think, process, recharge as much as you can in this place. Did you at least call your wife?" "No," I answered again, although I didn't even think about Anne the entire time we were here, except for a few fleeting seconds. I was busy. "Well," he replied, taking the bag from my hands, "you're not busy anymore. Call her. Go on duty at the clinic, sleep in the bed, eat unpackaged food, jerk off on the potty like any normal guy here. That's all I need. No matter what you do other than call her and skip the next mission." "Who will cover my guys?" "New blood, name is right. Now he will take control." "Are you going to send a rookie after me?" "You know what's funny?" he replied, smiling at me with that devilish grin that implied sarcasm. "I said the same thing when they sent you to replace me." Having lost that argument, I grabbed my equipment and tried to find my assigned room. Unfortunately, I got lost twice, and once again after visiting the cafeteria. I sat on my bunk, checking and rechecking my bag to make sure everything was in its place. I walked up to the store, took the phone card, and made the promised phone call. I let the phone ring 5 times before I gave up and hung up. Dinner was much more crowded, with many faces I couldn't see, but as I approached one of the empty tables, a voice broke my concentration. "Doc," the voice said. I didn't turn around. because I wasn't the only medic there, and each of us who held that title earned it. Doc, the voice repeated, closer to me this time, and I turned to see who was calling me. He was a much younger guy, walking on crutches while one of his buddies carried a tray of food. "You look terrible, Doc." "It's been a few weeks," I replied, trying to locate him, but to no avail. I didn't see any tags on his uniform, it was just a regular boot. "Don't worry," he said, realizing that I couldn't recognize him. "You pulled me out of a burning Humvee a few weeks ago. You saved my bacon, Doc. I just wanted to say thank you." "It's my job," I said before going back to eating. "Have a seat. Tell me all about it." I tried not to sound sarcastic, and luckily he understood. "We were wounded in Haifa. Our medic got a shrapnel wound to the neck. Your squad was in the area of our combined army, and you guys rushed in," he said, then held out his hand. "By the way, my name is Greenaway. Thank you again, Doc." I shook his hand. "No problem. How is your doctor recovering?" "He was evacuated to Ramstein. He did it. That's all we know." He looked at this friend and continued, "This is the guy I told you about in the mask." "So you provided assistance to 37 victims." Another voice spoke, this time from behind me. "How the hell did you do that?" "One at a time," I replied. "Are there any victims?" "No, Doc," Greenway continued. "You saved us all. You're a fucking legend, okay? My commander was trying to find out who you were so he could put you in jail for something." "No need," I said. "I was just doing my job." As I looked around, a small crowd began to gather. I picked up my tray. "Glad you guys are back. Take care of yourself." With that, I simply threw away the half-eaten food and got lost again on the way to my bedroom. A very helpful soldier helped me find my way, and when I thanked him, he simply smiled. "First time on base?" "You could say that," I replied. "Looks like I shouldn't have been running around the base. I got lost again." "I'm going to shower in an hour," he laughed. "If you need a guide, I'll pass by." We laughed and he left. I gathered my things and waited patiently, tried calling Anne again, but again was unsuccessful. This time I gave 3 rings before hanging up. "Trying to call the old lady?" asked my new acquaintance when I entered the shower. "Yes, without that much." "Dude, don't sweat it. It's still early in the States. She's probably sleeping." "Yes." "You're not new here," he continued. "How do you manage to get lost all the time?" "I'm just terrible at navigation," I replied with a forced smile. "This is not a place where you can be bad at this." He laughed loudly. "You probably won't even get to the clinic tomorrow without help, right?" "Why did you decide that?" "Come on," he grinned. "You look like that. I still can't understand whether you are going there as a patient or not. I heard their psychiatrist is quite nice." "A 3 can easily look like a 10 if you look long enough," I replied, causing more laughter. "That's right," he said. "I'll wait outside until you finish. Take your time." I quickly took a shower and went out with my new friend. We lit a cigarette on our way back and discussed all sorts of nonsense. That night I slept on the ground, and my dreams were full of horror, screams, and Anne's face, which became more and more blurry with every minute spent in that world of oblivion. I fell asleep and woke again, and each time I wondered how much of myself would be left when I returned. And to be honest with myself, I was no longer sure that I would return at all. The dream was always the same. I was walking to my flight and talking to an invisible interlocutor. All I know is that in this dream I am preparing for another flight back to a war zone when the loudspeaker in the terminal announces that the flight has been canceled. Not my flight, but someone's. We walk past a long line of planes, among which one is just smoking wreckage. "Well," I'll say to my invisible interlocutor, "looks like we just found out why the flight was canceled." We laugh, board our plane, and fly east to the sound of artillery and machine gun fire, as if it were a well-rehearsed battle reenactment from the Second World War. The smell of gunpowder and burning jet fuel fills my nostrils, and every time my interlocutor was about to say something, a different sound wakes me. It's the same dream every night. Only small details change the color of the clothes I'm wearing, the details of the airport, but everything else remains the same. Even the moment when sleep interrupts me is always the same. This time I was awakened by the sound of a big explosion. We were already accustomed to constant shelling from the rebels. The mortars rarely hit anything important, but sometimes they were lucky. "This is not mortar fire," said Workman, who was also awakened by the explosion. "If anyone knows mortar fire, it's him. A few days ago, he moved into our small house, which made sense since we were in the same platoon and spent a lot of time discussing various cases where we miraculously escaped death. His case was on a previous mission in Afghanistan when he was assigned to a team of snipers monitoring a terrorist cell. Another group was spotted, and the familiar Taliban response shelling the area with mortars followed immediately. "I felt the rocks from the mines hitting my feet," he once told me, "like tiny ant bites every time. Then the fire shifted and missed us completely. Or at least that's what I thought. Between me and the sniper there was a small crater, and in it lay a large mine. The damned shell turned out to be unexploded. I almost shit my pants." Honestly, I would definitely shit my pants if I were him. As we approached the site of the explosion and heard screams of pain and despair, I realized that he was terribly right. This was not a mortar shell that was lucky to hit. This was much worse and much more personal. Investigation later revealed that he was a suicide bomber who had strapped a grenade to his chest and entered the cafeteria that morning when it was crowded. What his motives and logic were will remain only conjectures of the investigators. I can't tell you what he was thinking at that moment when he walked through the doors and found himself in the building where he himself worked a few hours ago. All I can tell is the smell of copper and burnt leather that filled the air, and the screams that quickly gave way to an organized bustle. I can tell by how many gauze and bandages I used that morning by how quickly my voice died from all the screaming I had to do to organize the little help I received. I can tell you how we quickly assessed each person, determining who needed emergency care and who most likely would not survive to be evacuated. Time flew by like moments. The screams died down, and the rows of bodies grew larger. Our guards quickly combed the area, looking for a second attack or an advancing enemy, but found nothing. Unmourned tears stood in the eyes of the soldiers who saw their friends, brothers, and sisters solemnly carried away. Some soldiers shouted at me, accusing me of not being fast enough, of not having enough medical knowledge to save their friend. I agreed with each of them. When the last of the wounded were evacuated, Workman and I returned to our cabin to follow our usual post-mission ritual: light a cigarette and just breathe. "We have a mission soon." Workman broke the silence after his second cigarette. "It was supposed to be an intelligence operation, but I think things can change." "Perhaps," I replied. "When were we supposed to leave?" "Tonight," he said with a sarcastic smile, shaking his head and looking down. I immediately understood how he felt at that moment. "But I don't think this will happen." Our translator was the first person I tried. A piece of wood pierced his chest. I doubt he even realized what happened. "When should we be assembled for briefing?" I understood that this would happen soon after the latest events, but I didn't really want to think about it. "We're waiting for them to come for us," he replied, "at least for a serious accounting, and not just, 'Yes, I saw the two of them at the scene.' But it wouldn't surprise me if it drags on." "No," I said, "I think it's happening right now." The bellhop drove the little four-wheeler as if he were possessed, honking his tiny horn frantically, his eyes reflecting the same horror as ours. "Damn it, I heard that you were in the thick of things." "We thought you were already gone," said the messenger, with constant anxiety in his voice. He was a fobbit, someone who had never seen life outside the base. "Are you following us?" Workman asked with obvious dissatisfaction. "Yes, jump in," he replied. "The sergeant will be glad to see you. There are rumors that a large counter-offensive operation awaits us, and you may go as snipers." "All together?" Workman asked sarcastically. "Or again, only the chosen ones?" "Everyone is tearing you apart now," he continued, not taking the hint. "The sergeant will explain everything to you, but as far as I know, You will leave in a few hours." As we approached a large tent being used as a temporary headquarters, our driver made an ostentatious slam on the brakes. One would think that the doctors would have better conditions, but the reason for choosing such housing was simple. At any moment, they could be turned into a field hospital. And of course, as doctors, we had to be mobile. This was the best solution to accomplish our tasks. Was it awkward? Yes, but it met our requirements. "Hey, you two!" the sergeant shouted as soon as we approached. "Move over here, immediately." "If I didn't know better," Workman said, "I'd think you'd gotten us into trouble again." "I'm not the only one who knows how to get others into trouble," I replied with a fair amount of sarcasm. My wit was legendary, and often, regardless of rank, my sarcastic remarks would end with me being face down on the ground, carrying out some kind of punishment. Workman was the same. "I heard what you did," the sergeant continued, ignoring our chatter. "It was not an easy place. You made difficult decisions. There was no other way. You're going on a mission. Pack your junk." "Yes," Workman said. "The Fobbit already warned us." The sergeant glared at Fobbit, and he, without waiting for further comments, jumped on the ATV and drove off somewhere. In search of the one, perhaps. "For once," the sergeant said quietly, rubbing his tired face, "for once, could you not be such an asshole?" "I don't think it's physically possible," I replied. "He'll start to go into withdrawal." And now the less intelligent of the Wonder Twins speaks. The sergeant looked at me. "What about you? Can you not be an asshole for at least a few hours?" "Why does he get a few hours, but I get the whole day?" Workman complained, and I noticed that the vein in the sergeant's neck was about to burst. "Listen, idiots," he continued as we laughed. "You both are going on a mission, a 3-day patrol with a group of ghosts to observe an area with a high-priority target. They need medics because there is a high probability that they will have to engage in close combat. One of you will be with the sniper team, the other with the assault squad. They will be a backup group that will respond to targets that the snipers spot. Hopefully our information turns out to be correct, and we can take the bastard who is responsible for today's attack." "I'll go with the snipers," Workman said. "D can walk for a few hours. It's good for him." "So the snipers will coordinate a rapid response team attack on a high-priority target." I was a little puzzled by the situation. "Listen," replied the sergeant, understanding my confusion. "All I know is that the target must be captured for interrogation. A sniper team is in place as a last resort if the target cannot be captured and to cover the group." "Damn," I added. "Who are we trying to catch? This guy must be very involved." "I don't know," the sergeant returned to his harshness. "They asked for 2 of my best doctors, but they'll have to settle for you too. Get ready, ladies. I'll see you in a few days." It only took 2 days of continuous watching and waiting. 2 long days in the silence of radio traffic. Once we arrived at our assigned units, we were given a full briefing on the target. This man wanted to talk. He was going to tell everything he knew about the terrorist network that had kidnapped one of his family members. It was so secret that even he himself did not yet know what he would say. That's how well our intelligence worked at that moment. It took hours to find the target, or even the house where he was located. We studied his lifestyle, habits, watched his family, which continued to live their normal life, as if there were no worries. On the second day, we realized that we could capture him. The man loved his tobacco too much and, feeling completely safe in his village, often left his guards to watch the family, while he himself, disguised, went to the local bazaar to buy tobacco. Planning was the most difficult part of any operation, and this was especially difficult because we had to act within seconds. But when the time came, the team pointed to the target, and within a few minutes we were already out of the zone. When the guards became suspicious because the man had not returned, they began a chaotic search. Our sniper waited for this moment like a child waits for Christmas. 4 silent shots, and it was all over. His information led to the elimination of one of al-Qaeda's highest valued targets and powerful emir in Iraq. We ensured the safety of his family, and by the 3rd day I was already packing for the flight back home. After the usual isolation and a ton of tests, I decided it was time to see my wife. I made a decision. I had seen too much death and given too many years of my life. It was time to devote the remaining years to my beloved wife. It was time to start a family, get an education, build a house with a white picket fence, 2 children, and a dog. But first, Anne and I had much to discuss. I knew that I was responsible for a lot of the damage in our marriage, and I hoped that we could talk about it as adults. When I saw her for the first time after returning, the same passion greeted me, the same sparkle was in her eyes, the same love and tenderness when we hugged and kissed. Everything was the same, and I enjoyed every moment of this familiarity. As always, she knew that the few details I could tell her about my experience would only make her imagined picture of what I went through that much worse. In fact, I could not imagine that her imagination could imagine anything worse than what I experienced. "I missed you," she said to me one morning as we lay in bed together. "It's like you've returned. Finally." "We need to go to a psychologist," I told her. "There are still a lot of things broken in me." "I just want you to know that I love you," she said. "More than anything else. Please tell me you believe me, love." "Of course," I looked at her. "And I love you with all that remains." And it was true, with all that I had left. I loved every moment spent with her. She was everything to me. Until it stopped being. It was 3 months after my last return home, where I had lost over 75 brothers, and even more lost myself, when she finally told me the truth. We had already gone to joint sessions with a psychologist 3 times, when she asked for several individual meetings with the therapist, which surprised me a little, but it was quite expected. After several sessions with her, the therapist scheduled individual meetings for me. At each session, the doctor talked to me about conflict resolution, problem management, anger management, and how to cope with stress. I thought that Anne had noticed some problems at home that I had not seen, and the doctor was helping me solve them. "Darling," Anne began our next joint session after talking with the doctor. "You know that I love you with all my heart. I want you to know this. It's very important." "Okay," I answered, looking at the doctor puzzled. "I love you too, Anne, with all that I have left. You know that. I need to tell you that I'm pregnant." She began, and when she saw the smile on my face, she continued, "I don't know if this is your baby." "Remember everything we worked on," the doctor told me as I left the office. "Remember all the techniques you have studied." "To hell with your techniques," I shouted in the waiting room. "And to hell with this bitch too." "D," I heard a voice from the waiting room. "Bro, let's get out of here." "Love, please," Anne cried, trying to get closer to me. "We need to discuss this." "1 hour, bitch," I said in that quiet, icy tone she hadn't heard from me in years. The tone was described as an icy whisper of death, much worse than my usual curse. The few who have heard it also say that it sounds paradoxically soothing, but actually does the opposite. "You have 1 hour to collect your things and get out of my house." "Dude," my faceless friend continued. "Not here, bro." I realized that it was Vermin, as always, there when I needed him. "Let's go out into the fresh air and see what's going on." "What's going on?" that icy tone continued. "This is that I married a girl of easy virtue who wears a bastard. My marriage is over." All eyes turned to Anne. "What happens is that the bitch and her new whoever he is can be happy together." I finished. "This is inappropriate." "Shut up." I looked at the doctor. "Here is the resolution of the conflict. I'm leaving." I finished. "I give up." Turning to Anne, I continued, "You win. Take what you want, take everything. I don't care, I'm just done." "This is not what I want," I heard Werman lead me out of earshot. "What the hell?" Werman was clearly trying to comprehend what was happening. "Dude, I'm sorry you had to go through that." "It happens," I replied. "Probably it's just my turn." "Do you know who he is?" "I'm not interested," I replied. "A name would give me purpose, and you know I would use it if I had the chance." "No need, bro," he said. "Pull yourself together. Contact military lawyers. talk to them and get a referral to a good lawyer before she does. That's what I did. The divorce was ridiculous, to say the least. Her lawyer used the typical tricks that everyone has heard of, but to no avail. I hired a stunning female lawyer with blonde hair and green eyes, a slight accent, and a seeming air of levity. But she was very smart, assertive, and loved military men like a mother loves her children. Anne's lawyer requested marriage counseling, but my lawyer reminded them that we had already been through counseling without success. She then brought up Anne's pregnancy and how the baby might not be mine while I was on duty. Anne's lawyer advised her to return to her parents. The laws in Texas are very different from those in Georgia, and there we could not get a divorce until the baby was born and paternity was established. Anne returned to her parents. All this time she tried to talk to me, begged me to forgive her, tried to convince me to do at least something other than a divorce. I'll let you sleep with any girl you want. We can have a threesome if you want whatever you want. I just signed a contract with a private company, I replied. My lawyer has a power of attorney, and she will act on my behalf. I'm heading back to Iraq next spring. But you said you were tired of traveling, she said. You said that you don't want to see death anymore. You said that you would be faithful and devoted to me for the rest of your life, I retorted. Looks like we're both liars. 3 months later, Anne gave birth to a healthy boy with white skin and red hair. A DNA test was not required, but the court ordered it. When the judge saw the child, he sighed heavily and signed our divorce papers without even looking at the test results. When Anne's lawyer expressed grievances, the judge read them out loud as part of a public case. Somewhere in a Texas family court file, there is a record that says a woman once cheated on a deployed soldier with a boy who pretended to be a man and ended up getting pregnant by a third, unnamed man. A dream for a talk show. A few weeks later, Anne moved out of her parents' property. My mother, of course, was devastated that her ideal daughter-in-law turned out to be a prostitute. I don't think Anne ever found her son's father, or if she did, he didn't play a big role in their lives. Last I heard, she had met another man, a priest, oddly enough. The day she told me about this, the remnants of my love for her completely disappeared. I just told her not to cheat on him and to be happy. She broke my heart, destroyed our marriage, and now enjoys a new family and a white picket fence. And I was about to go to the Middle East for the first time as a mercenary. 1. The last person I spoke to was Werman. He was heading to Washington for a new assignment. This is terrible, man. I'm sorry you had to go through that, he said. Yes, it's a pity that it could have been, I replied. Don't do this to yourself, bro. You will kill yourself with what-ifs and achieve nothing. It's hard to avoid this, I said. I'm sure I played a role in the tension in the marriage, but still. It's not about the equipment, bro. He shook my hand. You just didn't find the right operator. Take care of yourself, my friend. See you when you get back. That was the last time I saw my friend. 3 months later, he was leading a convoy in the mountains of Afghanistan when his vehicle was hit by and wide. On his 7th deployment, on a cold Saturday morning, my friend Werman succumbed to his injuries. His wife followed him shortly after his funeral, taking a large dose of sleeping pills to go in search of her husband in the world that awaits us after this. When I returned home, the grass on his grave was already beginning to turn yellow, and I could feel the approaching coolness on the ground. I'm sorry I wasn't there, brother, I said, carefully placing a pack of cigarettes and a 6-pack of beer on his grave. If I had been there, most likely it would have been me in that car, and you would have been at home. You and your wife. I'm so sorry. Is this the friend you told me about? My girlfriend Angie carefully swept away a few stray leaves from the gravestone, trying to show respect for the person buried here. This is one of them, I replied. This crazy guy is the one with whom I went on business trips over and over again. I tried to hold back my tears. Long time no see, brother. I know I should have come earlier, but I just couldn't. It was difficult. But I wanted you to know that I think I found the right cameraman, and I wanted you to meet her. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you. and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think. Click to the next one. Click to the next one. Click to the next one. Click to the next one.